All right, it is 11:01 this morning, so we'll go ahead and get started. For those of you that are not familiar with me, my name is John Diaz. I'm an assistant professor and extension specialist in the Department of Agricultural Education and Communication. And today's in-service training is going to focus on the evaluation technique of focus groups. So we'll go ahead and get started because we've got a lot to cover in today's training. So real quick, we got a poll that I'll have you guys complete, and just trying to get an understanding of your engagement with focus groups. So question one, how many have participated in a focus group, and how many have led or co-led a focus group? So if you just take a couple seconds to answer those, just get an understanding of what your engagement is or has been with focus groups. All right, just got a couple more folks left. All right. Well, I won't hold up the whole group for the last two folks. So we'll go ahead and check this out. So we've got 5 of the 11 have participated in a focus group, and 4 out of the 11 have participated or have led or co-led a focus group. So a little bit less than half, but there's still a decent amount of folks that have been engaged in that type of evaluation technique, either as a participant or as a facilitator. All right. All right, so we'll move on to the outline. So as I mentioned, we're going to go over several things in today's presentation. We'll start off with just outlining some of the utilities of focus group within extension programs and provide some examples within the different utilities, go over focus group best practices and some of the responsibilities that you need to think about when conducting a focus group, so everything from planning to developing questions and so on and so forth. And then some of the challenges and solution strategies that you should be considering if you're going to utilize this type of evaluation technique. So for me, I'm a big fan of focus groups. Focus groups are a wonderful method for gathering information for both formative and summative evaluations. But don't limit your use of focus groups to the time after a program is implemented or completed. Focus group interviews are also valuable for getting information in the design process. So when you're developing your program and even the evaluations for your program, you can utilize focus groups within that context. So there's about 6 different main utilities for focus groups, and the first is assessing needs. Needs assessment is a good opportunity to use focus groups to bring together key stakeholders and develop a discussion around how to develop a program that is in tune with the needs of the target audience. So an example with an extension is Extension wanted to expand its outreach programs to minority, ethnic, and cultural groups in the state. It conducted focus groups to listen to these residents to determine what types of outreach programs would be most beneficial to their communities. Focus groups were held with various locations and different languages to gather insights of local residents. With this information, Extension then designed effective ways of delivering services, classes, and other opportunities. So this is a really basic example, but you can see how it was utilized within the context of more minority inclusion in extension programs. Another utility for focus groups is for designing the intervention. So now you understand the need, but you're trying to figure out how to best design your program to meet that need. So focus groups are a way in which to interject key stakeholder input into that process. So an example with an extension is Extension teamed with a local school district to design a program to increase the amount of fruits and vegetables that grade school students ate while at school. The team conducted focus groups with students, parents, teachers, and the food service staff to identify barriers to eating fruits and vegetables and to identify motivators to eating more fruits and vegetables. The team used the focus group findings to design programs that increase kids' motivation to eat fruits and vegetables and decrease the barriers. So as you can see, by including these key stakeholders through focus groups and designing of interventions, you're able to identify barriers towards delivery and identify the best delivery options to achieve the type of change that you're looking to attain. The last one that I'll go over in detail is to pilot test data collection instruments. So once you've understood the need, you've designed the program, now you start to build your evaluation tools and framework. And through that process, one of the important parts to measure the validity of the instrument and reliability is through pilot testing. So focus groups are one way in which to do that. So just to give another example is, a year after completion of water conservation study, the program leads were asked to conduct focus groups with participants to evaluate the program. Although participants were extremely positive about the water conservation program, they complained consistently with much passion about the telephone surveys used to collect participation data, even though we never asked about telephone interviews. Participants said the telephone surveys were tedious and frustrating because the response categories changed frequently, and without visual cues, the participants couldn't remember which response category to use. Some said they became so frustrated they didn't take the survey seriously. So had focus groups been used to test the data collection instrument and process, in this example, they may have identified this problem and gotten better compliance in data. So by giving your target audience the opportunity to interject in this process through the focus group methodology, you're able to understand kind of the warts within the evaluation tool and instruments, and make those changes before you roll them out to a larger group. So those are three main utilities and examples. In addition to those, you can use focus groups to evaluate policy options, to understand quantitative findings, and to monitor and evaluate agency operations. So as you can see, there's a lot of uses for focus groups. So there are some basic best practices that you want to consider when developing and implementing your focus groups. And I'll just kind of go through each one of these and provide some explanation on what that means. So the first is that the questions are focused. The questions used in a focus group interview need to be carefully sequenced, that they focus more and more specifically on the key topic of the study. So this means the questions are progressively direct to participants in discussing the topic in greater detail and more depth. So you want to make sure that you go into a direction where you're able to explicitly focus on key areas that you're trying to gain information from. There is no push for agreement or consensus. So focus groups are distinctive in that the goal is really not to reach a consensus or to discover a single solution. Focus groups are in fact conducted to gather a range of opinions and experiences, and the moderator really wants to make sure that they don't pressure the participants to come to this agreement. Indeed, we have gained valuable insights in focus groups even from individuals who have described unique perceptions or experiences. So in focus group studies, the decision-making process occurs after all focus groups have been completed. Focus group participants often offer recommendations, but these are used as input into the decision-making process by those who sponsor the study. So really what this means is you're not trying to get everyone to come to agreement around different ideas. This is just a way to glean multiple perspectives and get multiple opinions in a streamlined process that then you can utilize in the decision-making process within your own program. Another best practice is to ensure the environment is permissive and non-threatening. And this is really an important factor to consider to make sure that your participants are open and genuine. The focus group environment should be comfortable. The moderator must be perceived as a person who's open to hearing anything. The moderator lays out ground rules. And lays out ground rules. Excuse me, I'm having a little technical difficulties on this end. So they just make sure that you allow the participants to see themselves in you. You create an environment that allows them to openly share their ideas with you, and you don't dismiss any ideas that are brought upon the group. One of the biggest misconceptions within focus groups is that you want to have a diverse, heterogeneous audience, and that is not the case. You want to make sure that the participants are as homogeneous as possible. So the rationale behind that is kind of closely tied to the permissive and non-threatening environment. Best practice is you want to make sure that those that are in the focus group feel like they are representative of those that they are engaging with, and again helps them provide more open and honest feedback. One of the paradigms that you see this issue occur is when you have kind of frontline workers in a focus group with their supervisors. They're not going to provide the same type of input as if they were around other frontline workers. So just an example of how to keep these groups homogeneous. And if you want to get a diverse group of folks, just make sure you just have multiple focus groups that are homogeneous but diverse in the spread in regards to how many groups are put together. Another best practice is to make sure the group size is reasonable. Usually the rule of thumb for focus groups is about 5 to 8 participants. And there are several reasons for this, one of which is it's easier for the moderator to manage. You're able to manage those folks that maybe talk a little bit more and bring folks out of their shell that don't talk as much. So it's just really for management purposes, having that small group is really important. Patterns and trends are examined across groups. So this is making sure that the findings that you glean from each focus group are analyzed not within the silo of each focus group, but they're evaluated across focus groups so that the cross-cutting themes that emerge from this type of endeavor come to the forefront rather than kind of insular thought within each one of the groups. The group is guided by a skillful moderator, and this is extremely important. If you're going to have discussion-based learning, the moderator is one of the key components of this. You yourself can be a moderator, or you can work with somebody else who is more of a skillful moderator and help to co-facilitate their process based on your engagement and management of the different program. And then finally, make sure the analysis fits the study. And analysis is really predicated on the focus of the interview, of the focus group. So if you're trying to figure out the needs of the program, make sure that the analysis fits in and outlining what those needs are and so on and so forth. And there's different levels of rigor in analysis, and just make sure that you assign the type of analysis that fits with what you're trying to do. So there are several responsibilities that you need to take into consideration when developing a focus group. And this is just slides just to outline what those are. So there's different responsibilities within the planning process, developing questions, recruiting, moderating, analyzing, and reporting data. So I'll give a little bit more detail of what each of these look like and unpack some more things that you need to be considering along the way. So the first step in planning is to understand if the focus groups are the right fit for your evaluation. I previously went over some ways in which you can use focus groups within Extension, but you also need to understand that focus groups are not meant to be used for other purposes. So if you're looking to come to consensus, as we went over, this is not the right tool. A way to teach knowledge or skills, this isn't a teaching approach, so you can't use that for that purpose. And then a test of knowledge and skills. So this is not meant to understand a group's ability to apply knowledge or retainment of skills. So these are just 3 key areas that you need to consider if you're looking to get information within each one of these, that maybe focus group's not the best way to go. Once you've determined that this evaluation technique is appropriate, you want to clarify the purpose of the study. Sometimes evaluating team members, so team of agents, the agents themselves, or an administrator disagrees about the type of information they want to obtain through the study, and what they will do with the information once they have it. So having a clear purpose makes not only planning, but conducting the focus groups, analyzing, and reporting simpler, because you have an understanding of what you're looking for and what you're looking to get out of the process from the very beginning. The third step is decide what types of people you're going to listen to. So this is essentially who your target audience is that you'd want to include in the focus groups. And then, what types of people have the experience and characteristics that will enable them to provide the type of input you're looking for in your study. Some of the people that you want to consider listening to are those that are most affected by the change or the program. So these would be potential program participants. Those who support the change or program before it can happen. So these are potentially collaborators in your county, other key stakeholders that you can bring into the fold. Employees, so both frontline staff and managers who implement the change. So if you've got volunteers, program assistants, yourself. Government leaders or elected officials, especially from a funding standpoint, having them understand this process and included in this process could potentially lead to additional funding. And then influentials, respected people who may not hold an official office. So in looking at local program champions, if you're able to include them in the planning process, it really helps to increase recruitment of participants in your program. Fourth step is listen to your target audience. You want to create a process that could really, quote unquote, listen to your audience to allow you to ask and answer a few questions. So what type of moderator would people feel comfortable with? Where might the groups be held? What dates and times might work well for people? What do people find with the characteristics you're looking for, and so on and so forth. So this is a way to really develop a meaningful focus group process based on the inclusion of these participants in the planning process. And then finally, putting your thoughts into writing. So you want to develop a written plan for your focus group, and developing this plan forces you to arrange your ideas really in a logical order, and it also allows others to review your plan and offer comments. Your written plan ought to include a statement of purpose, describe the number of groups, list the potential questions, and provide a timeline and budget when appropriate. So this is just making sure that you go into focus groups with a strategic plan and are able to move forward with that plan because you have set the foundation out from the very beginning. So the basic strategy is to conduct 3 or 4 focus groups within an audience category that is of interest to you. So there's different ways in which to conceptualize it. So if you want to evaluate a special education program and want to compare student, parent, and teacher reactions to the program, you might plan 3 or 4 focus groups with students, then 3 or 4 focus groups with parents, and 3 or 4 focus groups with teachers. So this shows you how you're able to get to a diverse audience, but you keep the focus groups homogeneous. If you're hearing new information after the 3rd or 4th group with one audience category, you might want to consider conducting additional focus groups until you have reached redundancy. And what redundancy is you're not receiving new information. So it's the same information is being passed along over and over again, and you've reached that point. You do not use a statistical formula for determining sample size. Instead, you use the concept of redundancy or theoretical saturation to identify how many people you want to include in that study. With redundancy or theoretical saturation, the researcher continues interviewing until no insights are presented, which I just mentioned. In effect, the researcher has exhausted the range of views on the topic. And really what it's saying is continue interviews after reaching this theoretical point of saturation really won't yield any more information. So in trying to figure out how to be most useful and expedient with your time, when you get to that point, it really just makes no sense to continue to move forward in data collection. So we'll move on to developing questions. And when you're looking to developing questions, you want to make sure that you develop those questions that address the purpose of the study. Although that really sounds obvious, some study teams get swept away dreaming of questions that would be fun to ask or nice to know the answer to, but don't address the purpose of the study. You really want to focus in and hone in on those questions that will produce information that's important for you and other decision makers within the program. You want to write your questions in a conversational or easy to understand manner for the participants, and really use words that the participants would use. You want to aim for quote unquote the right set of questions, so not too many or not too few. Usually the rule of thumb is around 10 to 14 questions, which would be appropriate for a 2-hour focus group. So if you're going to be utilizing less time, just adapt the amount of questions accordingly. You want to make sure you sequence the questions so that the early questions set the stage for conversation, and the later questions focus on the most important topics. And this is one of the more specifics on creating that environment that is necessary for open response. So you put in the easier questions at the beginning to start to spark the conversation, and then you focus in as things move down. Phrase questions so they are open-ended. And this is really important. You don't want to ask questions that can be answered in one or a couple of words. So since this is discussion-based evaluation, you want to make sure you ask questions that would lead to discussion. And then include some questions that get participants actively involved by listing, sorting, arranging, drawing, or some other activity. So you're not going to always get the type of response you want from these open-ended questions. So by giving them questions where you ask them to carry out some sort of activity, can kind of get these folks out of their comfort zone and get them more engaged in those subsequent questions. So kind of the next step, and once you've decided what the questions are you're going to ask, you want to develop a questioning route, which is a set of questions developed for 1 or more focus groups. For a 2 to 4 hour focus group, plan to use 10 to 14 questions as I mentioned, and write it in a conversational way. There are 5 general steps for developing effective questioning route. The first is to hold a brainstorming session. With this brainstorming session, you'd invite about 4 to 6 people who are familiar with your program for about a 1 or 2 hour meeting. Just think about how many people you can include. 4 to 6 is kind of the rule of thumb, but if you can just get a few folks, that would be beneficial. The individuals that you bring to these brainstorming groups may be colleagues, members of the program, individuals representing your target audience, or some of the target audience themselves. You're going to ask these people to generate questions that could be asked in your evaluation. So you're able to really bring together a lot of different questions that could be asked through evaluation in a very quick time. Then you're going to utilize the brainstorming questions to draft a questioning route. So you're going to have one person use the questions generated in the meeting as the basis for developing the questioning route. And you want to select the questions that best address the study purpose and seem most likely to provide useful information. And then you want to go through the process of ordering or sequencing the questions in a logical flow, looking at those that are more general in nature and putting those at the very beginning, and then honing into those most specific questions at the end. Once you've had an opportunity to create that initial draft of the questioning route, you can get an idea of the estimate of time that you'd have to engage the group and spend on not only the whole focus group on each and in each question, and then once you have those estimated times, you can add to determine what type of time engagement you want to message to your focus group so they understand the time commitment. You then send this draft questioning route out for feedback, where you'd include those in the initial brainstorming process to give you the potential to revise the questioning route based on their feedback. One of the things you want to remember is the same questions are asked in all interviews with each type of participant. However, separate groups are going to be conducted. For example, with the previous example, teachers, parents, and students, a slightly different questioning route might be used for each of those audiences. So for example, you might want to ask students a question that you don't want to ask their parents or teachers. So you've got a core set of questions for each questioning route with some additional questions based on the group, but you want those core questions so that you can make comparisons across the focus groups, as I mentioned earlier. All right, so we will go ahead and jump into the next poll. Give me 1 second to bring that up. So the next question is, consider a focus group designed to inform the development of a pest identification program. We want to determine how the program should be developed to meet the needs of the target audience. What is the best way to ask this? So we're looking at a type of question that would look at audience needs. So based on what was presented to this point, select what you feel like would be the best way to ask about needs within a focus group. All right, we still got about 8 people. So if you could get your answers in the next about 15, 20 seconds. All right. All right, so the vast majority of folks got the answer correct. So I'll go over each question and why it is the right or wrong answer. So the first one, do you have any pest problems? The reason why this is incorrect is because you can answer it in 1 or 2 words. So you can say yes or no, and you're really not going to get much information from that type of question. How big of an issue are pets on your property? So there's two issues with this type of question. One is you're leading your participant, you're already identifying that the pests are a big issue, so you're leading them to identify this paradigm within their answer. Another issue within this question is you can answer, again, this question with a couple of words. So they can ask you, how big of an issue are pets on your property? It's a big issue. So again, you're not getting much from this type of answer. With the third one, please describe how you currently manage for pests on your property. This gives them the opportunity to describe what their current management processes are, and you can make a judgment of whether they're using the right processes, and then probe to see what it is that they're missing from a knowledge standpoint to be able to implement the right system. So really this one's predicated on you're focusing it on what you're looking for, and it gives the opportunity to provide an open-ended response with more description than the previous two answers. All right, so we will keep moving along. All right, so the next thing we'll go over is recruiting participants for focus groups. When you have your plan and you know the questions that you're going to ask, really the next challenge is finding the right people and getting them to attend the focus group. The first step in this process is to identify as precisely as possible the characteristics of your target audience, which we just mentioned. A basic principle of focus group interviews is that the researcher controls attendance. You don't want to invite people simply because they are interested in attending. You invite people because they meet the screens or qualifications for the study. You invite people who have experiencing something specific or who have common characteristics. So I'll give you an example. They may have participated in a community program that you are evaluating, or they may be residents in the community that you are doing a needs assessment for, or they may be farmers who have adopted improved agricultural practices. So it's really, you're trying to hone in on the group that you'd want to engage with in the program, or those peripheral key stakeholders that would provide some input on the paradigm that you're looking to address. One of the challenges of focus group interviewing is how to get people who may be uninterested to participate in your study. A lot of times you'll realize that people may be apathetic, indifferent, or even consider the topic to be irrelevant. At times you will want to involve people who are not initially interested in participating. If you limit your study to only those who show interest in the topic, you really fall into the trap of getting biased results. So to be successful, you need to be thinking about your recruiting procedures as well as the incentives to participate. So there are two distinct qualities of successful recruiting. The first is the process is personalized. This means that each invited person feels that he or she has been personally asked to attend and share his or her opinions. So you want to make sure that this is something that you went out of your way to link up with them individually, personalizing the process and showing them that their time is valued. Second, the invitation process is repetitive. Invitations are given not just once, but 2 or 3 times. And so this kind of follows the Dillman's method for surveying. You want to make sure that you have a contact with them multiple times so that they are able to engage with the message or digest the message at some point in time. So here are the steps in a typical process of recruiting. So the first step is set group date times and locations. Most groups with adults are scheduled for 2 hours, and you want to make sure that if you're going to engage children or youth that they're usually shorter. Don't schedule more than 2 groups in one day unless you have multiple moderators available to conduct the focus groups. The next step is to recruit potential participants. So you want to recruit them via telephone or in person. This allows you to respond immediately to any questions or concerns about the study. Before beginning the recruiting, be clear about how you're going to describe the study. People are really going to want to know the purpose of the study and the purpose of discussion, who's going to want the information from the focus group, what the sponsor of the study is going to do with the information, and why they're being asked to participate. So the kind of why me question. The third step is send a personalized letter. Soon after the person has agreed to participate, send him or her a personalized letter. Don't use a general salutation such as dear friend or dear colleague or dear participant. This letter should thank this person for agreeing to participate and confirm the date, time, and place of the focus group. And then once you've sent that out, just make sure you send a reminder or a set of reminders through phone or contact of some sort with a day before the focus group to remind him or her of the group. So something to effect, I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow at, and then put the location and time of the meeting. So this just provides, again, a structured and personalized process to make sure that you increase engagement in the focus groups. So typically you want to find a full pool of people who meet the selection criteria, and then you will randomly select individuals to invite from that pool. For example, you might invite every 5th person on a list or every 10th person who enters a store. So just basic examples. Here are different ways to find a pool utilizing this approach. So find a list of people who fit your selection criteria. Think about who might have such a list and engage them. So this might be a list of program participants or employees or parents. Piggyback on another event that attracts the type of people you want. So for example, do farmers in a certain area get together for a specific event? Recruit on location. So for instance, invite every 5th person who arrives at a clinic. Ask for nominations, ask for key people like elders, educators, or service providers for names of people who fit the selection criteria. And then from there, build snowball samples. So once you find some people who fit the selection criteria, ask them for names or other people who fit that same criteria. So you're identifying the initial frame through these different processes, and then from those initial potential participants, building additional capacity or participant engagement through them. So as we've mentioned, getting folks to engage in focus groups can be a challenge. So you want to address and eliminate any concerns or barriers for their engagement through incentives. There are different types of incentives that you can provide, and it's not only left to money incentives. So there is the money incentive that you can provide, and sometimes this takes the form of a gift card or entry into a contest or something to that effect, but providing some sort of financial incentive has definitely proved to increase their engagement in this type of focus group effort. But there's, again, additional ways in which you can do that. So you can provide food during the focus group. So letting them know that during that process, before, after, or during that, there will be food or snacks available to them. This is just another way to increase their participation. There's also gifts, so it doesn't necessarily need to be a financial incentive. You can give them some swag or some other form of gift to increase their participation. And then there's more intrinsic motivators or incentives. So letting them know that we value their insights about the program and their perspective so that they feel like they're being complimented or honored by their engagement in this process. Explaining that the process will be enjoyable, so they'll actually have an enjoyable time while engaging with the process, and it removes the barrier that this will be an onerous time sink for them. Or finally, letting them know that their participation will help with larger community goals and help will benefit the community as a whole. So as you can see, there's different ways to incentivize folks to participate in a focus group, and you don't need to necessarily just hang your head on financial incentives. So just be creative on ways to incentivize participation across these different areas. So now we'll go over some of the moderating best practices. I won't take too much time on each one of these, but these are just different points that you want to take into consideration if you yourself are going to be the moderator for a focus group. So the first is to be mentally prepared. You want to be sure that you're alert and free from distractions, so arrive early so that you can get relaxed and be ready and put yourself in the right mindset to listen. Another thing is you want to make sure you have the discipline to listen. So often beginner moderators are delighted that people are talking, and they don't notice that the participants are not really answering the question. So as you listen, you want to ask yourself, are they really answering the questions? And if they're not, refocus their attention on the questions that you're asking. Another part of the being mentally prepared is making sure that you're familiar with the question routes. Know which questions are the most important, and know which questions can be dropped if you're really running out of time towards the back end of the focus group. One thing that if it's available, it's really useful to have an assistant moderator. An assistant moderator improves the quality of these focus groups. On one level, the assistant helps by taking care of details, so making sure that there's refreshments, monitoring the recording equipment, or dealing with latecomers. But on a more important level, the assistant helps to ensure that the quality of analysis is there by taking careful notes, summarizing the discussion at the end, and just acting as another set of eyes and ears to help with moderation and analysis. So if you have the opportunity to include a colleague or somebody else to co-facilitate, that would be very helpful for you. Use purposeful small talk before the group begins. You want, as I mentioned before, you want to create a warm and friendly environment for your participants to feel like they can provide genuine feedback. So while you're waiting for participants, engage those who arrive first in small talk. Small talk really can take on any form, but it's making sure that you have informal discussions on topics of causal importance. These informal conversations that occur before the focus group help participants get a sense of you as the moderator. The small talk should put participants at ease and foster conversations among the participants even before the focus groups begin. Think of your role in this time before the focus group as what good hosts do when a guest arrives at their home. So this, again, just a measure to make sure everyone feels comfortable before everything gets started. Part of this is, you could just welcome them in, introduce them to others that are already there. Just like I mentioned before, discuss an easy topic. And it really makes sure that those topics are easy to talk about and non-controversial. If there are participants that are new to the area, ask participants about the weather, geography, etc. So as you see that, all of these components are really predicated on keeping the participants comfortable. Another best practice is making sure you record the discussion. So it's really, as a moderator, it's impossible for you to catch everything. And if you're sitting there trying to take notes, you're not able to keep in tune with what is being said and be effective in probing. So there's really two ways in which you can record that are effective for focus groups. One is just the traditional audio recording, where you're able to gain the audio of those responses that were gleaned during the focus group process. There's also the option for video recording. One of the problems with video recording is it leads to the perception of topic sensitivity or issues with confidentiality. So if you feel like that's going to be an issue with your group, then maybe the audio recording is most beneficial. Either way, if you're doing video or audio recording, you have to make sure that you go through IRB approval and informed consent to make sure that the procedures that you're implementing are in touch with the human subjects protocol. And especially if you're going to be publishing, it's important that that approval is attained before you start data collection. Some of the moderation or facilitating best practices in regards to transitioning and facilitation are outlined on this slide. So the first is give a short and smooth introduction. Make sure you welcome everybody. Give an overview of the topic. In this first component, it's really important that you provide ground rules for discussion, so folks understand what will fly and what will not. And so when you interject later on in the process, they understand that this is tied to those ground rules. And then finally, ask the first question. As discussion gets going, make sure you use pauses and pros to draw out more responses. Really be comfortable with using about a 5-second pause. Beginning moderators are sometimes uncomfortable with silence. However, pauses encourage people to add to the conversation. Probes are really an effective means to get more detail. Usually detailed information is more useful. So consider probes like, would you explain this further? Or can you give an example? Or I don't understand, tell me more. So that they can kind of unpack a little bit more detail based on their initial response. Control reactions to participants. Don't lead participants by giving verbal or nonverbal clues as to what you like or don't like. The moderator should avoid showing signs of approval or disapproval. So for example, it is often tempting for moderators to give a broad smile, a nod, or of his or her head when hearing certain comments. Participants really will quickly spot this behavior and then assume that you're more approving of these responses. So you want to avoid not only those nonverbal cues, but also verbal cues like that's good or excellent. And don't correct for participants during the group. If they share information that is harmful, offer the correct information at the end of the group. Do not become defensive if the participant tells you they think your program is horrible. Instead, try to get information that will help you understand their perspective. An additional practice to use is subtle group control. Your job is not to make sure everyone speaks the same amount in a group, but everyone should have the opportunity to share. Some people have more to say. If they are answering the question and giving new and useful information, really just let them continue. But you want to make sure that you control dominant talkers by thanking them for their input and asking for others to share. Remind the group that this is important, that we hear from everyone. And then call on quiet participants. They are often reflective thinkers and have wonderful things to offer. So you want to invite them to share by saying something like, Maria, I don't want to leave you out of this discussion. What would you like to add? So making sure that you bring out some of those introverts to share their information through that process. So throughout the process, you want to make sure that you periodically repeat responses, interpretations to the participants. And this is really for your own purposes to make sure that you are actually capturing the discussion. And this helps to provide additional clarity when guiding the discussion and interpreting the results. And then finally, use an appropriate conclusion. One way to do this is to summarize the key points of discussion and ask for confirmation. If you do have an assistant moderator, they'll typically do this. Do not summarize the entire focus group. Instead, you want to summarize about 3 to 5 of the most important points. Review the purpose and ask if anything was missed. And then finally, and obviously, thank the participants and conclude the session. So we will have one more poll as part of today's training. Give me 1 second as I pull that up. All right, so this has to deal with moderation. And the context of this is you're putting together a focus group to understand participants' perceptions of certain plants in relationship to Florida-friendly landscape programming. One of the participants describes a plant as a weedy nuisance, and then he goes on to say how it reminds him of his neighbor. Before you know it, you've heard a lot about how he feels about his neighbor. So based on all this, what is the best way to respond to this type of participant? So we've got 4 different responses. So if you just select what you feel like is the best way as a moderator to move forward. All right, we'll give folks about 15 more seconds. We got about 3 left to answer. All right, so the correct answer for this poll is the first option. Politely tell him you're going to have to interrupt and redirect the questions to others. So I'll go over each one and explain why it was correct or incorrect. So the first one is correct because this will help to get the group back on topic and keep others involved. So you're still being polite with that person, explaining that their input is valuable, but really redirecting the whole group to the focus of the focus group. The second one, allow him to continue until he's done. You want him to feel his value for his opinion. And while you do want him to feel valued with his opinion, you're really getting away from the topic and not getting important input from others. So you don't want him to continue to go down a rabbit hole if it's not of benefit to the whole group. Tell him that the plant isn't one of your favorites. You want him to know you have something in common. So this is incorrect. You're really introducing your own opinion that could potentially influence their future responses. So I mentioned that earlier. You don't want to provide any verbal cues or nonverbal cues that allows them to understand that one answer is accepted over another. So that's really the extent of that. Does anybody have any quick questions before we keep moving? If you just want to type in yes or no, and that'll give me an opportunity to pause things here. All right. Looks like everyone's clear. If we do have any questions at the end, we can address those. So we've gone over developing questions, recruiting, and actually conducting the interview. And now we'll go over the analysis part of all of this. Really the overall takeaways for analysis and just some basic understandings that you need to come away with is you want to find out what is meaningful to the purpose of your evaluation and really match the level of analysis to the problem at hand. This really helps you understand what type of approach you want to take, understanding if descriptive analysis is more important or if you're wanting to make more larger generalizations using inferential analysis. This helps to make that generalization and understand what you're trying to do. Look for major themes that cut across groups. So that's what I mentioned earlier, is you want to make sure that these themes are not insular to just one focus group. So making sure that your analysis cuts across focus groups to really identify what those overarching themes. And really just this entire process needs to be grounded in the purpose. So there's not any sense in adding additional analysis if it doesn't lead to the information that you're looking to collect and understand for the purposes of your program. So one of the key components is to make sure that your analysis is systematic. There really is not a single best way, but rather many possible ways to have a systematic approach. Being systematic simply means that the analyst has a protocol that follows a predetermined and viable set of steps. So here's an example of a systematic analysis process that we have often used. So notice that the process begins with the first step, where the focus group is still being conducted and continues after the last focus group is completed. So this begins the first step. So start the process while still in the group. You want to listen for vague or inconsistent comments and probe for understanding. Consider asking each participant a final preference question and offer an oral summary of key findings and ask if the summary is correct. So these are 3 processes that you can use while you're still in the focus group itself that can help provide clean ties to the analysis process and provide some more meaningful information for that as well. So the next step is to continue the process immediately after the group. There's several different things you can do. You can draw a diagram of the seating arrangement. This allows you to understand, where people were seated and how that may have influenced their response. Spot check the audio recording to ensure the machine picked up the discussion. If the recorder didn't work, immediately take time to expand your notes. So this is something that you can help to mitigate any technology issues by having you recall what was involved in the process. One of the things that I utilize to help mitigate this issue is for every focus group, I have 2 recorders. This is a lesson learned that I use from my own experience where I actually only had 1 recorder. After the interview was over, I noticed that it did not pick up any audio, and I was left to recall the focus group, which in itself is not a fun task. So make sure you have at least 2 recording devices so that if one doesn't work, the other one will help to pick that up. Recreate as much of the discussion as possible. So this is, after you've got your seating arrangement, you're able to spot check the audio. Just having a basic scaffolding of the progression of the interview or the focus group will give you an understanding of overarching group dynamics that you can then plug in your information on later on. Turn the audio recorder back on. Record the observations of the moderator and assistant moderator. Then you want to discuss and describe such things as what seemed to be the key themes of the discussion, what was surprising, how did this group compare with prior groups, does anything need to be changed before the next group, and what interpretations and ideas did the discussion produce. So this is somewhat of a debriefing process with yourself, any assistant moderator that you have, or other colleagues, just to understand those main themes, improve the process before the next time, and just make sure you have everything in order to move things forward. And then finally, label, date, and file field notes, tapes, and other materials. That's just a kind of organizational management thing, so that if you need to go back to it, you know where it is and it's labeled properly so that you can make that connection. And then the final step is the third step is to analyze the responses from each group soon after their completion. And so there's 2 different approaches. There's transcript-based analysis and analysis without a transcript. What you want to do for the transcript-based analysis, make up a backup copy of the audio recording and send to the transcriber if that transcription is needed. Then you listen to the audio recording, review the field notes, and read the transcription. Then you use the transcription with other group transcripts as the basis for the final step of the process. If you decide to go without a transcript, prepare a summary of the individual focus groups in a question-by-question format with amplifying quotes. Share the summary with other researchers who are present at the focus group so they can verify its accuracy, and then utilize the summary along with other group summaries as the basis for next step. Again, providing my own recommendation, I think transcript-based analysis is probably the best approach. With that being said, you don't have to have verbatim transcription. So just having transcription of the level of detail that's best for you would probably be the best approach to move this forward in the most effective way. And then finally, analyze a series of focus groups within days of the last focus group completion. And really this timeline is to make sure that the focus group is fresh in your mind and you're able to make extrapolations based on what you're seeing in the transcript of your own recollection of the event. So you're going to analyze the groups by category. So for example, first analyze the parents group, then the teachers group, and then analyze the student group utilizing that previous example that I mentioned. Analyze groups across categories. So for example, compare and contrast the parents groups with the teachers and the student groups. Then you're looking for emergency themes by question, but then through the overall focus group process. You want to identify where there's agreement or disagreement, both within each of the focus groups, but also across the focus groups. You want to consider developing diagrams of analysis that depict flow, sequence, structure, and other factors of influence. So this is just an idea this gives you an idea or a process to show how the flow of ideas, themes, and interactions moved within and across focus groups. And then finally, describe findings and use quotes from participants to illustrate. So this is a way in which to nest the participants' data under the themes so that if anyone were to review this process, they can see how you're able to come to the conclusions that you were based on the actual data that you collected. And then the final step is just preparing the report. You want to decide whether to use a narrative style or bulleted list, depending on what your own preferences are and what the preferences would be of those that would be reading this report. And then decide whether the report should be organized by question or overarching theme. I don't think there's any real clean rule of thumb. It's just whatever you feel like is best for you. Use a few quotes from participants to illustrate each important point. So this, again, this is a measure to show that your conclusions were grounded in the data that you collected. Share the draft report with other study team members for verification, and then revise in light of feedback and finalize the report. And this report is really useful for yourself so that you have a way of maintaining institutional knowledge of the focus group so you can revisit if there's anything that you want to refresh yourself on. But it's also something that you can pass along to administrators so that when you're to provide rationale for the design of your program or creation of an additional program, they understand that what that decision is grounded within. So in conclusion, focus group interviews can really provide valuable insights into program evaluation. They can be used alone or in combination with other evaluation methods. Results from focus groups are particularly valuable because they can provide insights into the logic and rationale for certain behaviors, explain why these behaviors take place, how a program or issue is perceived, or the barriers or concerns of key stakeholders, and because these answers are presented in words and logic of the target audience. Focus groups look easy, especially when conducted by a skilled moderator, but they can be challenging to plan, conduct, and analyze. Successful focus group studies are grounded on 5 key steps. So it's planning, developing questions, recruiting, moderating, and analyzing. Each one of these steps has their own best practices and is critical to success. Those who seek to have successful focus groups should be attentive to performing each step with care, thought, and skill. Those who seek to develop skills would benefit from reading the literature on focus groups, observing experts conduct focus groups, and practicing key skills and seeking feedback. So if you haven't conducted a focus group yourself, just trying to find ways to familiarize yourself, whether through the literature or being a fly on the wall during somebody else's focus group, would help to increase your understanding and awareness of this tool for your own program. So that's all I've got for today. Thanks for everyone who attended. If there's any questions on any of the materials that we provided today, I can go ahead and address those now. And as always, my contact information is provided here at the end. If there are questions that you want to follow up on a one-on-one basis, focused on your own program, I'm more than happy to work on that with you.